My wife started her physical affair. Strangely, I am calm in saying this, and while there are still some small residues of anxiety, hence my name, I will always be almost recovered. I have finally come to a peaceful place. I will tell my story for a few reasons. 1. To get the damn thing off my chest. I've spilled my story on other boards but never in its entirety. I am hoping for some catharsis through my past self. 2. To look back with hindsight vision and see what I did wrong and what I did right in order to help others not make the same mistakes or learn from what worked. 3. To offer hope. I realize that what my wife and I have managed to accomplish in the wake of destruction is something that isn't easy to do but can offer a glimpse that if two people are willing that it can be done. 4. To share and commiserate with others who have also exposed themselves in their story. It's only fair. Part 1. Family History of Infidelity. Winter of 1988. I'm 18 and it's my first year at college and I'm a 3-hour drive away from home. It's Thanksgiving break and I hop on a train and get picked up by my father, who I just absolutely idolize and adore. We were very close at the time. On the 40-minute ride home, he's rambling about many things and seems quite excited about something. Eventually he starts to talk about how he understands how marriages fail and how people grow apart. He complains about my mother in a lot of ways, and while I was uncomfortable with the way the conversation was going, I sympathize with my dad's situation because I identified with him more than my mother at the time. Christmas of 1988. I'm home from college again, and on the 27th my father announces he's taking a walk in the park near our house. This is an odd behavior for him to do as he is very active with biking, canoeing and hiking. Though it was a bit strange considering the weather was cold and cloudy. I catch up with friends in the neighborhood and come home and notice that even though it's 8 hours later, my father isn't back. I ask my mother, that's weird, 8 hours is really long for a hike, isn't it? I find out months later that my innocent inquiry was what set my mother into looking at my father's activities closely. February of 1989, I come home for a surprise visit. More really to see my high school girlfriend at the time. Dad picks me up again and starts to tell me how glad he is that I came home because I'll be needed. He then drops the bomb that he's been having an affair and my mother found out. He has to consider everything that's happened and doesn't know if he wants to stay married. Thus, he is taking a 4-day trip to Puerto Rico by himself to think things over. He also tells me to be nice to my mom and that they are having dinner out that night to talk before he leaves in the early morning. Needless to say, I'm devastated by the news. My bubble has burst. I get home and my mom gives me a huge hug and cries. They soon go out to dinner and I have my girlfriend come over and lean on her. Interesting footnote. I lose my virginity that night. The next morning at around 5 a.m. I wake up and see my mother standing over me shaking like a leaf and crying. She's clearly having a breakdown. I find out that my father wasn't going alone. He lied, dummy me, and was going to PR with his mistress. This moment changes my life as everything I knew has completely been set on its head. I get her to the doctors and she gets meds. It was a horrible weekend to say the least. I find out things about my father's lies and start to see her side of things very clearly. I do my best to take care of her and even missed a day of school and went back to college late. My father comes back and says he ended it and will go to counseling with my mother. I think things will get better. Think again. Over the next 3 years I have to be the one who my mother relies on while my father continues to have on-again off-again affairs with the same woman. In a lot of ways, our roles reversed as I became parental to my mother in my early 20s. I began to despise my father as I watched my mother make many changes to make him happy, like losing a lot of weight and doing things he liked. Yet he couldn't do the one thing to make her happy and stop seeing this other woman. I was really thrown in the middle in many ways. My mother even begged me to call my dad one night to get him to come home when she knew he was at her place. Needless to say, the stress was unbearable, and that coupled with my blossoming bipolar disorder, I eventually drop out of college. The whole situation really made me hate both my parents in a lot of ways. My father for obvious reasons, as I really admired him and modeled myself around him, only to find out he was terribly flawed. Now while I didn't hate my mother, I hated the way she wouldn't stand up for herself and just leave the bastard. I also dreaded whenever I saw my home number on the caller ID at college because I was afraid I would have to deal with the same crap all over again. I began to harbor feelings that she was pathetic to take him back over and over again. Understandably, I feel horrible that I felt this way about my parents, but looking back I see why I did. I made myself a promise that I would never cheat on my girlfriend, future wife, and would try to repair a relationship or get out before seeing another woman. I also promised to myself that I wouldn't forgive anyone who did the same to me. A year back from dropping out of college, I lived at home with my mother and my brother. Just when I thought they would get officially divorced, they reconciled. I wasn't too happy with her decision, but realized that it was her decision. I began to distance myself from them and stayed out late getting high or drunk and struggled with my bipolar disorder. I used any excuse to stay out of the house. I would often work 80 hours a week as a retail assistant manager, getting extra shifts at other stores in an hour radius when other managers called out or were on vacation. It was at this store where I met my now wife, but whatever. It is end of winter in 1994, February, and my parents have been back together for almost a year now. There are no signs of my father cheating on her, but I admit at this point I wasn't looking nor caring if he did. I just wanted nothing to do with it. One day, I come home from work and see my parents at the kitchen table looking woeful, and they're asking me to sit down as they have something to tell me. I think to myself, oh great, here we go again. The news was far worse. My mother was diagnosed with stage 5 colon cancer, and it had already spread to her liver, where several inoperable tumors resided. Her chances of living past a year are not good. I do have to give my father some credit, as he really did take care of her that year and made her happy. She passed almost a year from her diagnosis. Fortunately, it didn't get really painful or bad until the last 2 weeks of her life. We had her in our living room when she finally passed away early in the morning the day after my brother's birthday. At this point I had patched things up with my father for the most part, especially having witnessed his caretaking of my mother. We agreed to start a business together, and I ran it while he funded it while he worked at his regular job. It's November of 1995 and my mother has been dead since February. Our business seems to be working and taking off. We're doing it out of the house, and we started to look for warehouses in the area. My brother, who is a math guy, did the accounting on the side while he held his teaching job. He calls me up and tells me he forgot to pay the phone bill and if I could write the check and mail it. I can't find the bill in the bills due folder. I figure it must have been mixed in the house bills. I go downstairs and start looking through my father's bills. For whatever reason, my eye catches a glimpse of a weird charge on his credit card bill. It's from August, when he took a trip to Vegas for business, and the charge was for $72 for the Chapel of Love. Wait, what? That's one of those quickie marriages places. My father has been secretly remarried less than 6 months from my mother's passing. I start to scour his credit card bills and discover that he had dinner on Valentine's Day 3 days before my mother's death at an Indian restaurant. I know that the total of this bill is definitely a dinner for two. The bastard had dinner with his mistress and now wife while I sat next to her watching her die on Valentine's Day. Back in February he had told me he needed a small break that day and went out to dinner. I thought nothing of it at the time and understood needing some time away after spending over a week at her side. Being Valentine's Day wasn't even a consideration for me. I packed my things, found a place to live with a friend, and left the business. My brother took over. I became a car salesman of all things. I didn't speak to my father for 3 years. It wasn't until I went to get engaged and wanted my mother's stone for the ring that I spoke to him. In some ways this was good for me. I finally started to control my bipolar disorder and I learned to support myself. I was just so angry at the lies of my father. Was I disappointed he got married so quickly after her passing? Yes, but it was his life and he couldn't hurt my mother anymore. I just didn't want to be a part of his life for a period of time. I should mention that my wife and I were getting serious during this horrible time period. She never shrank away from all of the stress during this time, and that's when I knew she'd be a keeper. Part 2. My wife, our relationship and marriage. To this day my wife always says with a smile when we tell people how we met. I hated him at first, he was an egotistical ass. But I tend to grow on people like a wart. My wife was only 17 when we met, and while I thought she was attractive I had no interest in dating a high school student as I was 24. Nevertheless, my wife was right in that I was indeed an egotistical ass, as I was still trying to control the manic swings of my bipolar disorder. My wife was also a shy girl, not a social butterfly by any stretch of the imagination, and I tend to gravitate towards those types of people. I home in with my brashness and try to break these people of their shells. We eventually became friends, would often go to diners or play billiards after late shifts or inventory at work, usually in groups. She graduated HS, and 2 months after her turning 18 we went to go see The Lion King in the theaters as friends. That night we found ourselves groping and kissing, etc. Our relationship, founded in friendship, grew quickly. There was no awkward stage as we already knew each other well. My wife, having had only one boyfriend prior to our dating, was still a virgin. I had the honor of taking that from her. Eventually she moved in my apartment with me, after Mom's death and me shunning Dad, as I helped support her during her attending college. I proposed during her senior year and we planned on having our wedding after her getting a job in 18 months. But as life usually does, it threw a curveball at us. She became pregnant with my first son. No biggie or real scandal, as we already had plans to marry. We just moved up the schedule a bit. She was just starting to show at the wedding. We had an offer by her parents to live with them for a period of time so we could save and have help with the baby and eventually get a house. The plan worked, and before my son was 2, we had purchased the home we live in today. At this point my relationship with Dad became less strained, and since the business was taking off and they needed help I was brought back into the fold. Side note, early in our marriage I actually expressed concern to my wife, due to my dad and his excuses, that since she had next to no physical experience that come midlife crisis time, she would betray me and wish to experience someone else. She would always reassure me that she would never do that and loved me too much, and I was stuck with her. Soon after my second son was born, this one planned, we really were hitting our stride. Life was good, money was fine, 2 wonderful babies. Physical life was good and frequent. We really enjoyed each other's company and most problems were minor. About 2 years after the birth of our second child, my wife's legs kept feeling like they were asleep, pins and needles, and the feeling wouldn't go away. After several doctor's appointments, an MRI and a spinal tap, which she had a terrible reaction to, she was diagnosed with MS. We both were stunned and scared of the future now. We were now looking at expensive meds, even with insurance, to maybe help my wife's condition, as she could look forward towards relapsing and remitting lesions on her neural network, possible blindness, paralysis, wheelchairs, etc. Fortunately, in the 8 years since her diagnosis, her condition is considered mild compared to some cases. Plus, with new med tests on the horizon, my wife's outlook is much better now, as it doesn't appear she will end up in a wheelchair or have anything too debilitating. Nevertheless, we didn't know that then, and it was something that weighed heavily on my wife. Even today, the facial tics and numbness in her fingertips drive her crazy, and it weighed heavily on me as well. Yet because of my years of needing to suppress negative emotions due to my bipolar disorder, I'm afraid I didn't address the illness the way she needed me to. I know this now from after D-Day discussions, but at the time I projected an apathetic attitude towards her MS. I felt that if I did this, I could alleviate her stress if I made her think it wasn't a big deal. Aside from the MS, my wife started to become unhappy in her job. Without going into detail, she worked a hospital job. She had the same amount of education and training as a nurse, but her particular field never paid as well, never got recognition that others did, and she had to deal with a lot of hospital bureaucracy. Add the fact that she is a wallflower type of personality, she often felt left out of the group of coworkers. Thus, we decided together that while she was still young, almost 30 at this point, it would behoove her to go back to school to get a master's in another related field that would make her happy. Sorry, won't say what. Get more money and more recognition. The problem was that in order to afford it and also have time for school and work at the same time, she had to take the graveyard shift at a different hospital. This also allowed us to pull the kids from daycare when they weren't in school. This move proved to be a huge mistake. I believe it affected her MS negatively due to lack of sleep. It affected her emotional well-being, and we now spent a lot less time together and only slept in the same bed twice in a week. Thus, our physical life dwindled to maybe twice a month as a result. My wife and I viewed her night shift as a necessary evil that would eventually be over and something we would slog through to get to the golden ring. Of course, having been lonely at night with the kids in bed and the wife at work, I began to spend way too much time on Facebook and playing dumb games like Mafia Wars and some online poker. I now started to divert my attention to reconnecting with old friends instead of where I should have focusing more. I will say that even though I had reconnected with old female friends, I purposely allowed my wife to view any and all emails, Facebook messages that she wanted to, and if I ever met with them, I always tried to get my wife to join us and never put myself in a spot where we would be alone that wasn't a public place. And no bars, and always tried to include husbands. Mind you, I didn't go gallivanting around too much either. I had maybe gone out about twice a month if that. So, as we near my wife's affair, I can say that looking back we had problems that weren't being addressed. But I was complacent back then. I didn't think we had anything too earth-shattering to deal with. Part 3. A storm is coming. Since I always had the luxury of friends to talk to and do things with, and my wife really hadn't, for years I always encouraged her to go out and have a break from the kids, through our passive-aggressive delivery system of sarcasm. I knew that she was jealous of my more forward approach socially and the ability to get out and about. Thus, I encouraged her constantly. Why don't you call up so-and-so and go have coffee for a bit? But she never could muster up the nerve to do it. Her reasoning was that if people wanted to hang out with her, they would call, and since no one ever does this, then why should she? Typical shy, lower self-esteem think. Thus, when she started to talk about a group of people who she started having fun with during her dinner break, or whatever you call eating at 2 a.m., I felt happy for her. As I stated before, she never felt included in her previous job, so this was a good change for her, I thought. She shared with me the personalities of these people, as they were a mix of hospital workers, techs, and security guards, both male and female. She talked about their gossip, the way they joked, etc., and nothing seemed inappropriate. Sometimes they would as a group go out after work and get breakfast. She was always enthusiastic about talking about her new friends, so being the good and supportive husband, I expressed happiness for her. Over these months my wife started to lose weight. While she was never very fat and was always very attractive to me after the baby, she did start to look better than she ever had before. Due to her MS, she also had other neurologically related disorders, so she was taking medicines. That also contributed to appetite suppression. And fortunately for me, I was the heaviest I had ever been. After quitting smoking, I gained 35 pounds and never took it off, and I gained even more through poor habits and too much ice cream. Despite my weight gain, the other change I noticed during this time period was that my wife was really starting to come around physically. She became bolder in initiating and expressed the willingness to try new things, so I was not going to complain about this in the slightest bit. It was enjoyable. August comes and I noticed that she was starting to talk about how cool a certain male member of the group was. His sense of humor was similar to mine. He liked to cook like me and my wife. A food person, he was expecting a baby in September and she was excited for him. Note that in my usual passive-aggressive manner, after seeing his picture and noticing that he sure did look a lot like me, I made joke to my wife that she was a chubby chaser. At the end of August, my wife asked if I would mind if she and a group of friends went over to his house after work to try some of his premium cigars. I started to feel really jealous at this but held my tongue, as I felt that if I was going to go out with friends then she could and I shouldn't be controlling. It was with a group, the guy was having a baby any day now and thus I shouldn't worry. I felt I was being silly for feeling jealous and dismissed it. I guess my gut was screaming at me and it was well-founded. The day she went over to his house was August 31, 2009. Part 4. The Affair and D-Day. That morning before she went to bed she called and told me that it was fun and that everyone had a good time. During the next 2 weeks, I heard hardly any mention of Mr. Cigar Guy and felt relieved and started to get comfortable that my jealousy was for naught and patted myself on the back for doing the right thing by allowing myself to trust her in that situation. I believe it was a Wednesday when I was at work one afternoon and our son's teachers knew to call me instead of my wife for any issues since she slept during the day. The teacher called and was asking me what dates were best for my son's next IEP meeting. He has a DD. I told her that I thought my wife emailed her, as she told me she did, and I would check with her and get back to her the next morning. I went into my wife's email to see if the date was discussed in any emails with the teacher. I saw nothing in the inbox, so I looked at the outbox. That's when I saw a few emails from my wife to Cigar Guy. My wife isn't the most tech-savvy person in the world, and it was obvious that she didn't realize that she needed to delete outbox emails if she wanted to hide something from me. She clearly deleted inbox emails that corresponded. These emails had clearly shown that he was coming over to my house 2 to 3 times a week the past 2 weeks. While nothing overtly dirty was being said, there was certainly a flirty playfulness to them as they called their meetings appointments. At this point I could feel my face flush with blood. My heart started pounding so much you could see my shirt pulsate. My mind raced the same way as it does when I get manic, and all I wanted to do was to react. I lost control of all logic and all I wanted to be get home. I printed out the emails, and then ran out the door, shouting to my brother as I left, "I have a personal emergency. I can't tell you why, but I have to get home." I rushed home in a tizzy. The drive usually takes 25 minutes, but it only took 17 minutes, and I'm shocked to this day I didn't get pulled over for doing 70 in a 35 zone. As anyone who goes through trauma knows, often certain memories get burned into the brain despite the fact that we are so worked up at the time that we aren't thinking clearly. It's an odd occurrence that while the event is happening that our brain makes our senses so heightened that we take in so much of our surroundings yet often get frozen in action or just merely react instead of thinking. It's obviously a survival instinct when the flight or fight part of brains gets activated. I stormed through the house and up the stairs to our bedroom. I can still remember the smell of the beef stew that was in the crock pot simmering in the kitchen. I can tell you that it was a nice sunny day of around 76 degrees. I can even tell you the fact that my wife was sleeping on my side of the bed when I came to confront. Why I remember such a weird and inconsequential detail is beyond me, but I can still picture what the scene was like in all aspects as I flipped the light switch on. We had room darkening shades for obvious reasons. The dog laying on the bed at my wife's feet got startled and barked for about 3 seconds, waking her up before I had the chance. Her, "What are you doing here so early? Could you please explain to me why the duck you are having a man over to our place without me knowing about it?" Her, "Woke up real fast here. What do you mean? Guess you don't realize that you need to delete outgoing message. Now answer me." At this point she got the old deer in the headlights look and there was silence for maybe 5 seconds. "Well, maybe when you have the answer, I will come home." I stormed out and shot off in my car, picked up some smokes and went straight to a nearby bar. My hands trembling so much I couldn't hardly light the first cigarette I had in 2 years. It was a truly weird scene at the bar. There were maybe 5 to 6 other guys and one middle-aged woman sitting around the bar. Each one had at least a chair in between the next person as to not invade personal space. No one was talking to one another and everyone seemed to have had their faces buried in their drinks or phones. The bar was so quiet that only the TV with flickering made any noise. I didn't mind this at all as I was looking to do the same, yet I couldn't help but wonder if I would end up like these poor souls, always sitting in a bar in the middle of the afternoon alone yet surrounded by others. I was pausing to think that I was now one of those guys who got cheated on or a loser divorcee who watches his love of his life get everything she wants while I age lonely. Just as the third beer arrived in 10 minutes time since arriving, my phone rang in a silly ringtone that was assigned so I'd know it was my wife calling. I answered the phone in a monotone fashion as if I didn't know who it was. "Can you come home please?" I replied. "Give me 10 minutes. I took a sip of the beer and left it unfinished and headed home. This time I drove slower than usual, not wanting to hear the truth. That I was a failure and my wife would leave me for another man. Just to show what sort of toxic thinking one goes through during this period, the kids had already arrived home from school when I entered the house. They ran to give me their usual hello hugs and expressed surprise at how early I was home. My wife then told them to go into the other room to do their homework. They complied after a few whiny protestations. My wife then approached me with a softness and totally unexpected look of sadness rather than what I had expected prior. As she touched my cheek she frowned and said, "Oh no, you've been smoking, haven't you?" I nodded, trying to look impatient as I wanted answers. She then went on to explain that she didn't tell me that he was coming over because I had previously exhibited jealousy and didn't wish to get me worked up over nothing and that they were just good friends. Especially considering what I had gone through with my parents. Side note, the fact that she used one of the most painful time periods in my life to lie still haunts me to this day. The last time I had cried wasn't even at my mother's funeral, putting aside shedding a tear of joy or two for the kids' births and my wedding. It was actually 2 weeks prior to her death. She was sitting on the den sofa and I decided to sit next to her and watch the Odds trial coverage together. I reached over and held her hand. The hand felt like a skeleton and was bony. Mom was always plump but now was skinny except for her distended belly due to her liver being over thrice its normal size. Her breathing labored and you can see that she was in general discomfort. A wave of emotion hit me as I knew that the end was near. I excused myself and walked to the next room where I just lost it. The warm tears streaming down my face, my stomach clenching as I tried to muffle my howls of grief so she wouldn't hear them. I couldn't hold back. Over 14 years later I found myself having the same involuntary reaction as I buried my sobbing face into my wife's shoulder. "I thought I was going to lose you," I cried. After regaining my composure, I tried my best to scold her and informed her that she can longer lie about this stuff, that I was uncomfortable about him being alone in the house with her and that would stop and she would have to tell me what's going when she sees him or others, as it's only right that married people know where their spouses are and what they are doing. She didn't fight with it and apologized some more and agreed that she would do as such. He also let me know that it was likely that she won't see much of him anymore soon since his baby was due that week and would be attending to his wife and family more instead of going out. I felt relieved. However, the momentary sense of relief didn't last long. My wife was right in one thing. I had gone through this before by proxy with my mother. I knew that someone who I looked up to and trusted could lie and betray you. I knew that she could be lying to me and that I had to find out. I wouldn't bury my head in the sand like my mother. It was time to learn from her mistakes. Part 5. My second wind and second D-Day. I knew nothing of infidelity support boards, VOR. Looking back, I am somewhat shocked that I didn't think to Google these things right away. But I still possessed the wherewithal to figure out to uncover some answers I needed. I started by signing up online for the cell phone account. Until then we had received paper bills, and phone was in my name but whatever. And I knew I would be a month behind in phone records had I relied on that. Also had phone records. I soon identified his numbers, both home and cell, saw that her calls to him and vice versa were aplenty. It really irked me that she was obviously losing sleep to talk to him and be with him when we hardly had time for each other. I also checked her Facebook account. I had her password, and gained as much info as I could on the other man. There were no messages between them in the mail system. Facebook didn't save chat at this time. Of course I monitored the email, but they stopped using it for obvious reasons. One of the first things I noticed by perusing the cell phone records that night was that she placed a call to him on her drive into work the previous night. When I confronted her, this to me looked very suspicious, as if she couldn't even wait to get to work to let him know that I was onto them. That night I was dumb enough to confront again. This time I was a bit sneakier at least. "So, any more time with other men?" Her, "Nope. You've been calling him a lot." Her, "No, not really. In fact, I haven't even spoken to him except dinner break." "Oh really? Well, I know you're lying to me yet again now. I have phone records that you placed a call to him on your way to work last night. I really can't take this lying anymore and it has to stop." What the duck is going on here? Just be honest and tell me if you're having an affair so we can move on. I am sorry, I forgot about that call. I was just inviting him to our Oktoberfest party. I promise you that I am not having an affair and I love you too much to do that to you. She was so convincing, I felt like a fool for questioning her. I really wanted to believe her and thus I did for that moment. We then had a fun time after the kids slept. I did the last dumb thing in regard to uncovering her affair. Well, really dumb that is. I apologized for snooping and promised I would stop and trust her. Not only did I apologize, but I also actually pulled out the VOR that I purchased earlier that day from Staples and said I was ashamed I was going to use it. I was truly in a state of denial and she worked it to her advantage. I went off to bed. She said she would be up in a few minutes as she had to finish something up for school. I learned 2 days later she was having a Facebook chat with him about how they just dodged a bullet. Fortunately for me, my mistake wouldn't matter for long. The next day at work in the morning I just got off the phone with the wife as she said she had to get to her physical therapy appointment. So, after hanging up I went to log on to Facebook to see what stupid new gifts there were in Mafia Wars. I had forgotten that I still was logged in as my wife, since I had been checking out other man the day before. And there it was. Back then, Facebook had a glitch. And what a wonderful glitch it was for me. You could log into the same account from another computer at the same time. And if one user was having a chat, you could witness it live. There it was, the two of them chatting, and it was obvious she was chatting while she was talking with me. Her, okay, I'm off the phone now. Him, what time are you back from your PT appointment? Her, 10 a.m. I only have 2 more appointments, but I'll tell Almost Recovered that I have 6 more left so we can keep up the charade. Her, with a R getting edgy, I think we should just watch a movie or something since he still could be hiding that recorder. Him, yeah, my wife seems to be on edge as well, could just be pregnancy nerves. Her, got to go. Him, okay, on movie, maybe just a quick one instead, bye. At that point the chat went blank as she must have deleted the record. I lost it. I was back to reacting again. I called home, no answer? I called her cell, she answered almost angrily. Her, what? Why are you calling the home line? I told you I am on my way to PT. I'm trying to get out the door, I am late. Wow, you are something. You sat there and looked me straight in the eye and lied. So, you only have 2 more appointments, eh? There was some silence, and when she answered her tone turned snide as if she was proud. Her, yeah, well, what I said next I can't recall, but I started on a tirade until I heard the phone click. I thought to myself, that ducking woman just hung up on me, after 2 failed attempts at reaching her. I thought she turned her phone off as voicemail picked up on one ring. I immediately went to the number I had written down and called the OM. After the OM answered the phone, I didn't take the time to introduce myself. I felt that my demand would be more than sufficient to let him know who I was. You have 24 hours to tell your wife. Him, dude, you're overreacting. We're just friends. Hard to overreact to a quick one. Him, come on, that was just a joke. I'm done talking with you. I have more evidence than that. You have 24 hours. And I hung up. It was the one and only time I ever spoke to the man. To this day I've never met him physically. I'm not sure what I would do if I did. After hanging up I went into my brother's office and told him the short version of what had happened and told him I'm not sure what I'm going to do but to keep it quiet for now. This time when I left work, I wasn't rushing out of there. In fact, this time on my drive home, I started to feel a calmness wash over me. Sure, I was jittery to an extent, but I started to think clearer. I knew what had to be done. The path ahead of me was certain, and there's something to be said for certainty. Even if it's not a good thing. This time I knew I would not be my mother. I would not allow my wife to walk all over me anymore like my father had done to my mother 20 years prior. I knew in my mind what needed to be done and the only road that lay before me. I was going to get a divorce. On the way home I stopped at the physical therapy clinic to verify that she did indeed go there. I saw her car in the parking lot. There was maybe 10 minutes left in her session, so I knew if she didn't arrive home in 15 to 20 minutes then I knew where she would have gone. Had she chosen to do that, I would have hit the buzzer on OM's timer and called the other man's woman at her work, which I had the info for after my diligent research gathering from the day prior. Instead, I got home, greeted the dogs and went to the computer desk and sat in the swivel chair. I started to Google info on my state's divorce laws. 5 minutes passed and she walked in the door. As she came in, I turned in my swivel chair to meet her. If only I had a cat in my lap to stroke. I even had just shaved my head recently. Before I even had the chance to say anything, she immediately started prattling on about how her phone battery died and she did not hang up on me. She even showed that the phone was dead and hooked it up to the charger as she spoke. It might have been the first ounce of truth I had received from her in 17 days. Me, that doesn't matter. We should calmly discuss how we are going to proceed with a divorce. I am willing to have an amicable split to spare the children more grief than they will already experience from all of this. My comment: do you think OP is learning his lesson? I believe he is moving towards the right path. Do you agree? The final update to this one is coming tomorrow. It's only a 2-part story. Sub and bell.